Hi, everybody. I'm Melanie Escher, and welcome to today's session of the Arizona Telemedicine Program webinar series. We're just going to go ahead and go through my welcome slides here that we have since we're at the university. We expect to be acknowledged the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples, and today Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and the Yaqui. The Southwest Telehealth Resource Center represents Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and the Four Corners region, with a combined total of 72 recognized tribes. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. So again, welcome to this free CME webinar. And those of you, I've got certificates for everybody, including our EMS folks that have been following us. Again, welcome to all of you. Some tips and notes again: when you joined, the phone or your computer or microphone were muted. Please go ahead and use the Q&A for the chat function for the Q&A, and fill out the post-webinar evaluation. I will also send it in a thank you email when we're done to everybody that's attending today. And for CME credits, unfortunately, you can only get credits available during the live presentation. There is a code within that evaluation that you can text in. If you don't have an account with Cloud CME, you'll be able to email me and I can get you started with that. So we've got our continuing education, the outcome objectives, of course, the accreditation statement, disclosure statement. This was all with the registration information. I don't need to go through that immediately here. And again, the attendance tracking, the code will be found in the evaluation. And if you don't have the profile set up, you can email me and respond to the email that I send after today's session. We have our standard disclaimer. I don't need to read it. And again, go ahead and check our upcoming check for upcoming webinars and events at the telemedicine.arizona website. And Larry's got a little bit more on the next one in this series. And again, your opinion is valuable to us. Here is the survey link. A pop-up window will come up when you're done with this session. Plus, I will have this URL link in the chat, so you don't need to worry about copying it down right now. So without any further ado, I have the pleasure of introducing Larry York, who is a clinical pharmacist with infectious disease and HIV AIDS in the College of Medicine. And he's going to be starting us off and introducing our speakers for today. So Larry, I will pass it off to you.
Yeah, we'll just do our little quick intro here. Let me switch over. All right. First of all, bear with us. We are having all of the tech problems in the world. I don't know if it's solar flares, cyber attack, but we're going to get through this. So hang in there with us. But real quick, this is just part of our lecture series on unique infectious diseases, poisonings, and envenomations of the Southwest. I think today's topic, really cool, something we do have to worry about here too in Arizona. It's a big issue. But of course, just as a reminder, this is for really anyone that's interested. I think we got a lot of folks that are here that are EMTs. I think some emergency room physicians as well. But we have plenty of talks planned for you coming up. So these are the same slides if you've been to our other lectures that we typically show about things we plan to or have already covered. But we already do have a date set and plans for our next webinar. So if you like this kind of content, the next one we're going to talk about is Datura. You may have heard of Jimson weed. We're going to talk a bit about that. Mescaline, peyote, comes up often with that. And psilocybin, which is all the rage. You don't have to lick toads. There's other ways to get that hallucinogenic high. So we will talk a little bit more about that next time. And with that said, let me stop sharing and turn it over to Dr. Klotz, who's going to get us set off today.
Thank you, Larry. Let's see if I can get this up here. Unfortunately, my video component isn't coming up. I don't think you can see me. And it's kind of unfortunate because I put on a nice suit jacket, combed my hair, and prepared nicely for all this. But I'm going to start off today's topic about massive bee attacks. And this is something that's really important here in Arizona. And many of you may have already had some dealings with individuals who have been stung severely by bee attacks. So I'm actually sort of doing this again because I had given a talk at the Arizona Health Sciences, or not, Arizona Department of Health, in their vector control program about massive bee attacks and left them with the message, hey, we've got to really do something about this because now we've had some 14 people killed in Arizona because of this. But let's go to the objectives, which will be to talk about the history in Arizona of massive bee attacks and also the biology of these Africanized or killer bees. Most authorities don't think the word killer bees is really serving a good purpose, and I tend to agree with them. And lastly, what sort of public education is needed? So let us start off by just reading a little snippet from an online program or report from Tucson, Arizona. And this was concerning Marana, which is a little bit north of Tucson, and a young man who was killed after being attacked by bees. This was in July of 22. Apparently, this 29-year-old David Santiago was a landscaper working in the area of Thomas Aaron Drive and Moore Road when a swarm of bees appeared. Instead of just doing something other than what he did, he tried to help a juvenile to safety. He put the kid in another truck and then tried to make it to his own truck, but didn't make it. He died from his injuries, apparently, and on his way to the hospital. Well, is this particular incident unusual for the past 30 years in Arizona? Well, no. Actually, more people have died by massive bee attacks than rattlesnake bites. More people have died by bees than scorpion stings. More people have died by bees than Chagas disease in Arizona. So it's really past time to allocate some of our intellectual resources to address this problem. Here you see a picture of a nice honeybee, which you can't tell whether it's Africanized or not. They look exactly the same, but you can see some full pollen sacs on his hind limbs there. When it began in the United States was 1990, when Africanized bees arrived in Hidalgo, Texas, which is right on the Rio Grande River. And by 1993, they were in Arizona and quickly followed their entry into California and Nevada. I would recommend maybe pulling this article by Rick Vetter from the Western Journal of Medicine. You can look at it here online and get the citation. But it dealt with massive bee attacks up until the late 90s. And on the bottom of that, this slide, you'll see the counties in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California and Nevada that have been troubled with Africanized bees. So this bee, the Africanized variety, is known as Apis mellifera scutellata. The European bees, which have been the source of our honey for really centuries, is Apis mellifera. And although they're a subspecies, you can't really tell them one from another. You'll need some sort of probe, either by looking for proteins or DNA to distinguish these two subspecies. And one thing that you must keep in mind is that all wild honeybees in Arizona are the Africanized variety. Now, these actually escaped way back in 1956 in Brazil. They had been brought as a research study item to Brazil, where they escaped accidentally, and then over the ensuing decades made their way further and further north each year until they arrived in Texas in 1990. Well, one of the features of these Africanized bees is, although they have many good features, they cannot survive cold winters. So they're not overwintering in northern Arizona. Although they may be present during the summer months, they're not going to be able to survive till the following spring. And one of the experts that Dr. Shirazi and Larry and I have worked with over the years is Justin Schmidt, who passed away about a year ago. And we've worked a lot with him. And one of his theories was that mites, the Varroa mites, had actually eliminated most of the European honeybees within Arizona, which then assisted the occupation of hives by the Africanized variety, which arrived, as I said, in 93. Now, the one fact that must be kept in mind is the next one. If you disturb Africanized bees, it takes an average of 29 minutes for them to settle back down, go into their hive or back into their swarm and not bother you. Whereas for European honeybees, it takes about 3 minutes. This was studied decades ago and gives you some idea of the aggressivity of these insects. Their good features actually include increased reproduction. They swarm often, forming new hives or groups. An old queen leaves the old hive to a new queen and moves on, taking about a third of the population with them. And these are what you see usually in May or early May when they start flying over. You can hear them. I rarely see them, but I can hear them flying over our home in the desert. And they have a very high resistance to diseases. Now, venom is composed of mainly melatonin. It's a peptide, and it's 50% by weight of the venom, and is responsible for the myocardial, kidney, and other organ injuries. European honeybee sting contains about 142 micrograms of venom versus only 94 for the Africanized varieties, but the latter have more phospholipase A2, which is an allergen, the worst allergen in the venom. And of course, they're going to deliver a lot more stings than a honeybee, which maybe 1 or 2 might sting you. Human adults with 50 to 200 stings, this is important, are at risk for renal failure. 200 to 500 stings, they're at risk for multi-organ failure. And greater than 500 stings, they're at risk for death. So some facts that may be important are that formerly we used to be concerned about bee stings, mainly in the emergency room, because anaphylaxis or some sort of accelerated allergic reaction might occur. Well, this is no longer the main reason for the visit. It's now having multi-sting envenomation and the toxic effects. And in the study that Dr. Shirazi and I conducted along with Justin Schmidt, we emphasized the fact that people were overlooking the possibility of toxic effects from envenomation. So if we change gears just a little bit, well, the question is, if these bees are so dangerous, what education is online concerning the killer bees, if I may use that term? Well, actually, there's some very good integrated pest control and extension service documents online, particularly at the University of Georgia account, our site, and University of Arizona have excellent educational documents concerning honeybees. And if you look online just for massive honeybee attacks, you will be really overwhelmed with confusing and confused reports, often the same person dying, but with a different name and a different date in all the Arizona papers. Currently, the information really, it's trying to scare people rather than give them a selective message of what to do or what can be done. As a example of this, There's a movie from 2017 called Tsunami. It was a thriller with a 3 out of 10 on the tomato scale. But it was really silly. I saw a trailer from it, and you could see these people running around, but I don't know what in the world they were filming in front of they could have been flies for all I could tell. And actually, Killer Bee is apparently an excellent cigar, and it's known as the Swarm, and sold online, I guess. Well, the most complete data we have about recent data that concerns massive bee attacks was one that Dr. Shirazi, Schmidt, and I, along with Dr. Rahimian, wrote a few years ago. And this, we did a 3-year study of all the stings reported to the Tucson, Arizona Drug and Information Center. And there were approximately 300 people who were stung during that period. Most of them were stung once. That was 81% of the population. And as you can see, you have a descending order of number of stings when you begin to break down the groups. But once we get to 50 to 100, you see there were 7. And 101 to 500, there were 5. And there was actually one man who had 950 stings. And the only death in the study was a young man who died of anaphylaxis after 1 sting because he couldn't get to his epinephrine on time. So looking at some of the clinical effects of massive bee attacks in people who stuck around or the physicians made them stick around to draw blood and look for evidence of toxic effects of the venom, especially we're talking here about mainly melatonin. But the gentleman with 950 stings, you can see, had tachycardia, hypertension, a bump in the troponins, a coagulopathy, and rhabdomyolysis. And he wasn't in the ICU. He also had severe diarrhea. And further on down, you see several here, and all of them had, as you can see where the X's are, some effects, toxic effects of these multiple stings, i.e. over 50 or over 100. And here is one that had 140 stings who was allowed to go home. And at the emergency room, all that was measured was a fast heart rate. Now that doesn't give you any time to even measure toxic effects because they begin 24 to 48 hours after the attack. It takes a while for this to manifest itself. Well, the lessons learned from the massive sting attack victims was that all 100% of them lived, but only 50% were hospitalized. 50% of them were allowed to go home from the ER before the toxic effects could be even measured. And when the toxic effects occurred, they included renal injury, rhabdomyolysis, biphasic anaphylaxis, which is an unusual and rare problem that occurs where anaphylaxis may occur at the time of arrival. Because there is so much venom on board, even after successful treatment of the anaphylaxis, the patient slips back into anaphylaxis once again and has to be treated again. Hence, biphasic anaphylaxis and the cardiac effects. Now, these may take 24 to 48 hours to become evident. So sending them home, no matter how well they look and insist that they've got to be home, really is probably not the best thing to do with these patients over 50 stings. And victims with severe concurrent illnesses may do worse with the toxic effects than healthy people. Some other comments about the studied patients were that 13 had massive attacks, meaning more than 50 stings. 7 were hospitalized. 1 was in the ICU, as I mentioned. and 6 were not in the ICU, but they were hospitalized. And there were some 300 visits or more to the emergency room for the stings. And this isn't even including Phoenix or / Maricopa County, which would have doubled the number of people easily. And one person was hospitalized for 47 stings, and he was hospitalized for weeks for dialysis, highlighting at-risk patients. The annual economic health costs for Arizona are quite high, particularly if we were to factor in Maricopa County. Excuse me. Well, Dr. Shirazi is going to cover more of this in a moment, but what are some of the lesser known clinical effects of massive bee attacks? They can be found anywhere in the body, and he'll cover that in a moment with you. And often bronchoscopy or endoscopy are required to remove dead bees or dying bees, or perhaps even stings, as you see a venom sac in the lower part of the conjunctiva here, just below the pupil. Well, as I mentioned, occasionally people die, and Arizona's had at least 14 deaths since the arrival of killer bees or Africanized bees into the state. And they include climbers, and that was a common problem back in the early 2000s, as you can see. They're all males, and likely they were rappelling down the side of a hill, probably went by a nest or a hive where they were attacked, without fail rapidly by thousands of bees. And several of these people were either found dead on the ground or were hanging, rappelling, dead on the ropes. We've had people working on the road and landscapers, as I had highlighted in one of the first slides. And even in 2019, if you can believe it, there was a man trying to remove bees from his couch in his backyard. He knew the Africanized bees were in his yard. They were nesting in his couch, and he went out there and tried to tackle them without any netting or anything. And then another one, a landscaper, a worker on the road. And recently we've had one who was killed by a young man who was killed by bees that were swarming. And that was described in that slide I ran by at first. And another swarming group as well. And lastly, it was a landscaper in Peoria, Arizona, an 83-year-old man. So the results of the study were basically that death occurred only once, and that was because of anaphylaxis, not massive bee stinging. But the poison severity score from the people who suffered massive stings, i.e. more than 50, 3 were in the ICU, 32 had a moderate effect, of which 6 were hospitalized, and minor effect was about 110. And then we had a lot of people who weren't followed or we were unable to follow up with to complete the over 300 patients. And I've already covered this, but you can see that we did have a goodly number of people who suffered more than 50 stings per person, which is the cut line, if you will, for massive bee attacks. But as you can see, there were people, I think I mentioned before, there was one individual with 47 stings who ended up on dialysis. So you just need to be extremely careful and make a good assessment of these individuals. What we learned from these deaths is that 13 of 14 deaths were men, 4 were climbing or hiking, 4 occurred at home, Several were foolish attempts to remove bees from the home site. 3 were working on backhoes or tractors, which led to the idea that maybe all the noise and movement of these large implements may have made the bees more aggressive. And some of the things that can be said, we think should be considered by people in the emergency room is that physicians and nurses need to test for toxic effects in these massive bee attacks. Labs are needed after the stings for 24 to 48 hours. Anyone with over 50 stings should be hospitalized and observed for biphasic anaphylaxis and toxic clinical effects. And who needs to be targeted? Hikers and climbers, landscapers, heavy equipment operators, and homeowners. All these individuals need to be especially cognizant of massive bee attacks, either from a swarm or encountering a hive accidentally. And I'll be glad to answer any questions. I think I have given Mazda plenty of time to give his clinical assessments.
– No questions in the chat just yet. I think the
Okay.
big one I had for you, that somewhat of a gray area. So if someone presents with less than 50 stings, but maybe still some number, what would be those comorbid health conditions that might give you pause on sending them home? Like, which ones seem to correlate the most to having some of those subsequent issues?
Well, I think advanced age and or, severe vascular disease would be one.
Okay.
Melatonin is a peptide that constitutes 50% of the venom by weight, but it actually pokes holes in cells. So it
Oh,
can create, leaking from kidney cells or any cell that it's in contact with. It's actually a peptide I've used before in trying to kill fungi, and it's very successful at it, but you got to give a lot of it to a fungus to knock it out. But it will poke a hole in these
interesting.
human cells.
All right, we got a couple of questions, so I'm going to hold on to a couple that were submitted just to make sure. Ooh, we got a bunch. Okay. Let me turn it over to Dr. Mazda Shirazi real quick, but don't worry, I will get to all of your questions here at the end. We got some good ones for y'all.
Oh, and I need to not share, don't I?
You're good.
Okay. Am I okay?
I think so. Is this you, Dr. Shirazi? Oh, we can't hear you. Interesting. The mic is on.
We can't hear you. Maybe try calling in.
I can read the closed caption of what you're saying, but I can't hear you.
I can't hear him either.
Oh, Lord. Well, at least all the problems are starting on the same program.
We're getting them all out of the way already. All right, while he works to figure that out, then let me throw a couple of these questions out. All right, so the first one for y'all, should patients be admitted for serial labs, or should they just come back for them maybe after a discharge? Do you really see that need to keep them in the hospital?
Well, I think you'll hear from Dr. Shirazi about this. They use a system of over 50 stings. Generally, they want to hospitalize the patients. But those that are less than 50, yeah, I think it'd be a wise idea, particularly if they have any kind of chronic disease, to obtain labs at the time they're at the ER and have them come back in 24 hours and maybe 48 hours. If these are somehow abnormal at 24, just to repeat them at 48 to make sure that everything's resolving.
Gotcha.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, we can. All right,
Okay.
so I'm going to hold on to this last question. You take it away.
So let me say, anybody with congestive heart failure, coronary artery disease, advanced coronary artery disease, anybody with renal failure, you got to really watch out for. They're the ones who run into problem, and anybody that passes out. Anybody that has passed out, they're going to really have problem. So let me run through this. So what do we see? As was explained before, melatonin, it can cause several damages. It not only pokes hole into the cells, but there is a American Greek cardiologist that described three actually types of damage that it can do. One, and in a bee envenoming, it described Cunis 1 and Cunis 2. So direct injury to the cells, so cardiomyocytes, and then the vasospasm of coronaries have been also described. And I would suggest that most people above age 50, if you have a high sensitivity troponin and they present after massive bee envenomation, and if they're tachycardic, within 8 hours, you will see a rise in their troponin and in their creatine kinase. So muscle breakdown in general, but cardiomyocytes in specific. The other thing that we see is the closer people are to the hive, and this is something that actually Dr. Schmidt taught us, that if you get away from the hive by about 100 feet, you drop by about 10-fold the number of stings that one suffers. And we think that, we can figure out a number of stings, but you really have to count them. And I have counted on one ear of an individual over 100 stings. So, when you're talking about scalp, face, neck, and ears, you can sustain hundreds, if not close to 1,000. So you don't need to have it anyplace else. But one of the things that we've seen is if you pass out, they go into the airways. We actually have bronched and gotten pieces of or whole bees coming out. One of the funniest things that I saw, it was 2 years ago, one of our residents intubated a patient with a massive bee envenoming who required airway support. A bee came out of the endotracheal tube that was placed and stung the nurse. So you got to really watch for this. Take a look into the ears. You can always find bees in the ears. They like to go into any orifice that they can go under. The other thing is we see corneal abrasions, and these are massive corneal abrasions. Usually corneal abrasion is a small, but the bees try to get under the eyelid, and people sustain corneal abrasion, but they are so hyped on the venom and their own adrenaline, if they haven't been given adrenaline by them or epinephrine by the medics, that they don't complain about it. We recently actually had our first victim of this year's massive bee envenomation was in the hospital for 3 days, and before they called us and we told them to check, and he had massive corneal abrasion and had to be actually transferred to another hospital that had ophthalmology available to come in and see him. There are a couple of things that one can do to protect themselves. Long, loose shirt and pants, because we are in a heated area. Having a cover, a net cover that comes down over your head and neck. Not wearing light color, wearing light color clothing that don't attract them, and don't using perfume. It seems that, again, this is something that Dr. Schmidt taught us, that floral scents attract bees. I'm just showing again the numbers. I'm going to go fast through these because you've seen them. Most of the bees, they will, when they envenomate, they will leave stinger and the venom, including some of the muscles that actually pump. And you can actually, under a microscope, or if you have your phones and go to a 5 or 10x, you can see it actually continuously pumping. So we try, if they get in, early enough, we try to actually remove some of these sacs, and so that they don't continue injecting the venom in the individuals. And so here again, it shows that it's serrated and it actually stays in to the tissue. And then you saw the picture that Dr. Klotz showed, that you can actually have a envenomation or a stinger left in the cornea. So checking
And
the
let me
cornea
jump
for
in real
abrasion.
quick. It's
very
frozen on our end. It just shows that American Journal of Medicine slide, the massive bee envenoming. So it's either not sharing or something slides,
not
but it's frozen.
Is it? Oh, here we go.
It's like it's frozen on one, or it's a different slide
Is it?
somewhere.
Huh. So let me see if I can. It says I'm gonna stop share and reshare. Let's see if it. Of course, it's.
No
Do you
worries.
guys see
I believe
Homer
it.
Simpson? You see Homer?
It's coming. It's coming. Nothing yet.
Okay. So I'll just explain it. There's lots of pain. There's swelling. There's erythema, and of course, there's pruritus. It depends what area they have. My suggestion is that if their thorax and their back or belly is involved, use the same rule as burns in terms of figuring out whether the individual needs to be kept. Again, using at the palm without the fingers as 1%. You can sort of also use that to figure out what area or what surface area of the body is covered and the patient requires admission or not. Am I moving or not? Is this not showing?
No, but it looks like it's in the pre-contemplative phase of
Yeah,
sharing
maybe try
something.
stop sharing again.
Okay, I'll stop sharing again and I share one more time. Let's go. I'm going to go to, what are you guys seeing right now?
Just you. Oh, it's
Do
a
you see a
presenter
bee?
view, but we do see the slides now.
Okay, well, so again, you can have lots of GI symptoms because again, there could be GI tract is another area of involvement with massive bee envenomation. We also see that in severe snake bites and even in Gila monster being involved. Even when you don't have anaphylaxis, you could have people with nausea, vomiting, severe diarrhea. Sometimes they're hypotensive and one thinks that they are having abdominal pain, either obstruction or valvulus. And we had a couple of people sent to the CT just to figure out what's going on with their abdomen, but they're hypotensive and it's because of the massive amount of venom. Rhabdomyolysis was explained. So, and also a cardiac injury, renal failure we see. They can develop fever because they're in a hypercatecholamic state. If they passed out, they are going to get a foreign body pneumonia because they are going to be bees in their airway. Look in the nares, and look for nasal passages for bees. Look in the ears, again, corneal abrasions and stings are common. I'm going to go back to showing some of the pictures if you didn't see. And this is the venom content. Here I'm showing the serrations on the stinger itself and why it gets retained. I'm just going back on some of these. And again, corneal abrasion and how one can protect themselves. I'm going to stop here because most of the stuff was talked. And for those who are emergency physicians, our paper actually now is being used by Rush Review, and they have a section on massive bee envenomation and how to manage and detect it and who needs to be admitted. There is actually, our article is linked to Rush Review. So, any questions? And here I'm showing one individual for you, and you can see that even if you look or zoom in later on one side of the head, there is more than 50 stings. Do you guys see that?
Can you put it on the, the slideshow view? It's just,
I thought I was on a slideshow view, but here we go. I try again. Now I totally lost it.
oh no.
There's something going on today with the Zoom. How about, yeah, I think I am
Oh,
in a
that's
slideshow
okay.
view.
That's okay,
Nah.
Master.
So I'm going to stop here and let's have any questions that we have. I'm going to stop share.
Yeah, so the next one that we had was what can hikers and climbers do then to avoid attacks? You had mentioned, I think, a bit at the beginning, clothing. Are there things to
Yeah,
look for?
long, although it's hot, you want loose but long sleeve, long pants. You want to have socks that goes up so you don't have any area of exposed. You can have a hat, and if you have a net even in your pocket, you can pull it over your head. Once again, getting away from the hive. The swarm might come after you, but getting away from the hive about 100 feet, so running away from it or going back from where you run into it, that will help decrease the numbers. Going underwater doesn't help. Going indoors helps. Actually, we had father and son. The father went indoor, son stayed out, trying to get the bees with the hose and spraying them. And of course, it didn't work. You also see suppression of almost all hormone activity. The thyroid stimulating hormone, the T3, T4 themselves get suppressed. And you see it, that's very pronounced in children, especially.
Why would that happen, Master?
What was that?
Why would the hormonal
They think it has to do with the inflammatory response of our own body and actually our own inflammatory response sort of suppressing production of lots of the hormones. It's not well understood, but it happens also to the cortisol. One for clinicians and practitioners out there. Another thing is if people have seizures, if they have asthma, if they have diabetes, for a period of time after this, they will develop problems managing it. And I don't know why, but we see people losing control. Type 2 diabetes, their sugars go up, and it might have to do with that hormone suppression. The other thing that we see is actually you can just imagine with massive bee envenomation that there is a psychiatric sequelae. Again, nightmares, PTSD. I've actually had people in my clinic that they were in a group and one or two died, and that caused actually for them to have developed PTSD, and we had to send them to psychiatry and behavioral health. So we're seeing more and more of this happening now in groups, like people playing soccer. Last large group that we had, it was actually an old highway to Nogales that a bicyclist, I guess, run over a rock that there was a hive, and he was being attacked. The traffic going by, some people stopped to help, and they became victims. And actually, it ended up that in the city of Tucson, we received 11 patients within a matter of hours, 3 of which had to be intubated. So this can actually present as a cluster of group of patients.
Wow. If you were to encounter a swarm like this fellow did, is there anything you can do to try to discourage them other than just getting away?
The best thing is to call the professionals. You know, there are a couple of ways that they deal with it. Most of them, they either use pyrethroids, the 30% or above, which kills them, or they foam them. You know, our medics EMS, when they find people, usually they describe them as being totally covered by bees, and they use the foam. The other thing is to use soap, which that does the same thing as the foam. It sort of kills them by not allowing them to fly, and they fall away. But our EMS and fire trucks, they usually foam these people before they can go and extract them, because bees cover them, and it's not like they can just wash them away by water.
Well, you know, the most successful thing for people who aren't climbing, of course, is just to run away. If you can get a quarter of a mile away, you've outdistanced them. They won't follow you that far. So that's the big thing. And what's kind of confusing is, I thought, Matt, was that so many people, there were several in the group, or maybe 1 or 2 people, and one person would help one person get in their car, and before they could make it to the next car, you know, they were stung massively and maybe have died from it. So it just doesn't make any sense. It's not worth fooling with. Just get in a safe place. And as you said, going underwater isn't going to help, because they're going to wait for you when you come up for a breath of air.
Going indoors are okay if you're in your car. The fact of the matter is, bees, like other bites and stings, scare people. The situation I was explaining, that we had 11 patients. Some of them, we went back to their cars, and there were 1 or 2 bees that were either caught in their hair and stuff, and children that were in the car got scared and they got out, and they became victims too. So be careful. It's hard to go out and help and not become a victim yourself. If you can, call 911 and tell the individual to run away. These beehives can be under rocks. They can be in the trees. They can be, as a matter of fact, was it 3 years ago, we had them right outside of the South Campus emergency department. There was a tree, and it had a hive that established a swarm, and they were building a house there. And we called the professionals. They came, and they used soap water, and they got rid of them. But it's best to allow professionals to deal with it, and don't go out there yourself. Be careful when you go to service your air conditioners or swamp coolers at night. During summer, when you go there to do the service, be careful. They can establish a hive there. If you hear them, or if they come out of your chimneys, that's another place that they establish the hive. Be careful. Don't go opening up the plume and letting them come in your home and stuff. And again, if you see a couple of them coming out of a hole, it means there's hundreds of them there.
Got a couple more questions that came in. So then a follow-up, are yellow jacket stings more or less toxic?
Yellow jackets are supposed to be more toxic, okay? And there's at least clinically good evidence that in children they're more toxic. The good thing about yellow jackets is that they don't do a swarm attack. But you can sustain, if you disturb a hive, for example. And myself, I was a victim one time in Pennsylvania on a Appalachian hike, and I sat on a log, and there was a hive below. But I sustained something like 10 stings. They don't swarm like these bees. By the way, now there are two drugs. One of them is a antivenom specifically for the Africanized bees that the Brazilians now have, and they actually did a. I'm going to show here. They did a. I don't know why it shows or not.
It
But
does. It does actually.
there was actually clinical trial for sort of a combination of phase 1, phase 2. And there is a phospholipase A2 inhibitor that is being used, actually being developed for, and we're doing clinical trials for snake bite, which has potential of being useful in massive bee envenomation.
Very interesting. Another follow-up question. So does the swarm itself act differently than the hive?
Well, yeah, it does. It's, the apiculturist will tell you, well, don't worry about a swarm because they're not very upsettable. The point being that a swarm is a queen, an old queen who's left the hive, taken about a third of the resident worker bees with her, and is heading off to found a new hive somewhere. And so they don't have any food source with them. There's no honey or anything to protect, which basically is the motivation behind a hive being disturbed and then the bees coming out and stinging. So the apiculturist will tell you, well, don't worry about swarms. They're fine. They're not a big thing. But that doesn't include the fact that these are Africanized bees, which, as I pointed out, once disturbed, are very aggressive for about a half an hour. So best to stay away from them.
Yeah, our own University of Arizona has extension centers in every county in Arizona, including Maricopa County, and they're really helpful if you want to reach them in terms of how to get rid of them or be preventive of them. And they have a really great program in terms of integrated pest management and reduction of pesticide use. So I just want to put a plug for them. I've worked with them and they're great. They have entomologists. They have people who know the pesticides and work with them. They know the various areas in various counties and the agricultural products, what attracts these bees. So they're also a great resource to turn into.
All right, last call for any questions from the audience. If you got them, now is the time. I think we have covered just about everything. Oh, thank you, Melanie.
Yeah, on the university website, Cooperative Extension website, I just put the link in that has the locations of the Cooperative Extension sites by county, the tribal extension offices, departments, schools and centers, and the Arizona Experiment stations listed with all of their URLs. So I'll put that in the thank you email to everybody, so you don't have to worry about copying it right now, but it just helps remind me of what we talked about in the chat, so I can make sure that I can get that back out to you. So as Larry had, is there any more questions that we can have our presenters answer? Go ahead and please use the chat. And as Larry mentioned, we do have our next session is coming up that he talked about. And no, not that I've licked any Colorado bullfrogs lately myself, but it'll be coming up in April. And I believe we have chosen April 24th, Wednesday. So watch for that to come out. And once we get that registration live and ready to go, I will again send it out to all of our participants that have been following us in this series. And again, it's always fun to have these guys with us and to hear about these interesting things that we live with every day here in Arizona. So if there's no other questions, we're getting right on schedule here. We will have the files saved with this recording that you can you'll be able to download a little bit later. So that will be on our website. Other than that, I think that will do it for me. Dr. Klaas, do you have anything more to say?
No, just thank everyone for joining us today. And we've got many more to come. And some of them are things I am certain some people have never heard of.
Dr. Shirazi, any more words from you?
Just thank you for everybody for, joining us and listening, and thank you for your questions.
Absolutely. Thank you for the questions. And Larry, you want to sign us off for today?
Thanks for enduring with all of our technical issues. We powered through. I think this was a really cool topic. I hope it really sheds some light on something that I think we all have vaguely heard of, but are not super familiar with, honestly. So look forward to more exciting stuff to come.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.